Now, moving past the elves, we get to one of my favorite races, and them's the halflings. Why? Because halflings are very different than many other stereotypical races in terms of fantasy world. They have an interesting twist about them, an interesting concept, and getting right off the bat, they are smaller than everybody else, right? They're shorter. So that means that they have learned how to survive the endless quabbles and wars of the larger races. They have learned how to survive in the shadows of the large empires and kingdoms, and that is an interesting thing, right? They rarely grow above 3 feet tall, and they usually weigh between 40 and 45 pounds. So they're tiny people, but they have a very big heart and a very interesting mentality about the world. They are small and also very practical. So you're never gonna find a halfling who's gonna, typically scheme and do all these outrageous things. No, they are all about the good things in life. So, good food, good company, and most of all, good times in anything that a halfling might be doing. Starting off from just, tending to his farm to going out there and living the adventurer's life. They like to focus on the simple, practical things that any of us might actually enjoy. And let's say that this leads to a life of kindness and curiosity. Halflings are very cheerful people, and they're all about the party, all about, and I'm not talking about the group of adventurers, but more like the good times in life. They're all about friendship, wanderlust, curiosity, and they love discovering new things. Even the most simple of things actually gets them going, such as, exotic foods or an unfamiliar style of clothing. Now, halflings have learned very well how to blend into the crowd, and that goes beyond just their capacity to hide and remain unnoticed by the larger, more seemingly powerful and important people. They have learned how to stay aside of the large conflicts and wars and schemes and all those things that kind of bring a somber tone into the world, and instead focus on other things like hardy group of people, family, maybe friends, and they, because of this, they live in these tightly knit small communities, which of course doesn't mean that they're lonely people. As a matter of fact, they blend very well with other societies. So basically, they make themselves very useful, and their peaceful and kind way of life allows them to cohabitate with everybody else. That being said, though, halflings have this other side which kind of branches out from their inner traits. They're very hardy folk, right? They're very stout and tough when they need to be, and that is reflected in many of their traits. But starting off with the most basic one, dexterity score increases by 2. So again, halflings have a very stout heart, but in terms of physicality, they're small, quick, very light on their feet. In terms of age, they reach adulthood at the age of 20, kind of like humans, and they live a very interesting life, meaning that they live longer than humans, but not as long as elves. So they're kind of like a middle ground in terms of outview, in terms of predisposition towards the world, and they're mostly interested in let's say the small fineries in life instead of sophistication and refinement and stuff like that. The book states that even the most wealthiest of halfling is rather more likely to lock away his treasure and invest into something, or kind of build a home, build a small business, than aim to be a lord or a king or an emperor, because that's not halflings at all, man. And in terms of alignment, that again reflects into their alignment. They are mostly lawful good, right? Now, here's the first time in the book that the book is going to suggest an entire alignment to you, but there's a reason for that, because halflings are lawful people, meaning that they, instead of following laws or the let's say the written traditions of the land, they mostly follow their own inner code, and that code suggests that if a day goes by without having good food and good company and being able to rest in your own hardy home, then you're kind of missing the point in life. And also that leads them to be kind of good people. They're more likely to shelter you than kick you out, and they're also very, very open to all the good things in life. So in terms of size, again, halflings average about 3 feet tall, and they rarely weigh more than 40 pounds, but their size is small. And again, for the first time in the book, the size of your player character can be small. So there are specific rules later on in the book that speak more about the specifics of playing a smaller character. So fitting on the battlefield, number one, being able to move through other characters is kind of important, but also in terms of grappling, the more direct physical side of things, not so good. So there's a trade-off, but very, very fun in many situations. In terms of speed, base walking speed is 25, so like the dwarves, your stride is not as big as, them taller folk. But to compensate for that, they have this trait called lucky. And now that we're talking about this, combined with everything else, you're kind of noticing where the whole race kind of takes your character. Irrelevant of whether you're going to be a rogue or a warlock or a fighter, you're more likely to have this fun, more fantasy spin on things rather than being dark and gritty and that kind of stuff. So in terms of lucky, when you roll a 1 on an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll. Okay, so that can save your life. Again, think about that. That can play out into very interesting social situations, but you have to use the new one. So whatever you get on the second roll, that's it, man. Unless you get defeat, but obviously that's not the point in this video. Moving on, just after lucky, the next trait is brave. You have advantage on saving throws against being frightened. So you're small in stature, but a lot of the bigger folk don't get to have a heart as big as yours, and this advantage against saving throws, or rather for saving throws against being frightened, is very important in terms of game mechanics, but also very fluffy. It allows you to have these very cool role-playing moments. And again, as I've said previously, I love this about any ability in the game, that kind of works both ways. It's not just fluff, it's not just mechanical, but rather allows you to have both. And then the last one is Halfling Nimbleness. You can move through spaces of any creature that is of a size larger than yours. So again, this is kind of the beginning of the special rules for being small. So you get the point. You can squeeze through somebody's legs, you can move into tighter spaces, and that can play well if you're a rogue or a fighter, kind of like a melee class. But it also lends pretty well into being a ranged character. So kind of plays into the whole thing very well. And then languages. Halflings speak Common and Halfling. Yeah, who'd have thought? Halfling language isn't secret, but halflings are loath to share it with others. So this is kind of like a personal thing, very specific for the halflings, and it uses the I'm not sure how to put this. It's kind of like a gypsy thing, right? But more about the fact that they don't focus so much on literature and writing, but more about oral traditions and passing on stories and stuff like that. So them's the halflings, and they have two sub-races, kind of like the dwarves. One sub-race is the Lightfoots. So even their sub-races have this interesting twist. The Lightfoots are easier to hide, easier to blend in. They're more difficult to notice, even using other people as cover. And let's just say that you're more inclined to be getting along with the people in your party. So Lightfoots can easily be the heart of a group, and that is reflected in their statistics. Ability score increases by 1 in terms of charisma, right? And the other ability is naturally stealthy, so you can attempt to hide even when you are obscured only by a creature that is at least one size larger than you. So think about that. That literally makes you this small, fun, enjoyable character that gets to run around during combat, be nasty to the enemy, and getting to hide behind the big fighter or barbarian later on. A lot of laughs. I have to say, we haven't had a halfling in our party ever. There was one actually when I was playing in this other campaign, and I have to say it was one of the most fun things I've ever done in D&D, because it just allows you to roleplay both mechanically and socially on the table with these very cool ideas, very nimble things. And then the Stout Halflings, they're kind of the other opposite. They're the hardy folk, right? So they're all about having this inner strength, this inner conviction, but also being slightly tougher than their counterparts. So the constitution of a stout halfling increases by 1, and they have resilience. So stout resilience states that you have advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance against poison damage. So this is kind of like a playoff from the dwarves, but that means that you're more likely to make a dwarf friend than, an elven one. And with that being said about halflings, then we get to move on to my favorite race. Now, again, I'm doing this without any bias. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure how to be biased in a video that's overviewing races, but we get to the humans. And you're gonna say, whoa, okay, hold on, time out. Humans, really? I mean, and all these fantasy settings with all these fantasy races, humans are your favorite world? Yeah, because, I don't know, I just have this disposition about, the standard, human in a fantasy setting, and I like the fact that humans have this interesting, I don't know how to put this, dichotomy, but with more than 2 things, right? And I'm gonna get into it in a second, but the basic idea behind humans is that they are bound by no tradition, no preset idea, no, how should I say, no cookie cutter standard that they have to uphold. So unlike the dwarves who have their clans and have their traditions, unlike the elves who have their ancient secrets and their ancient upbringing, and unlike the halflings who have this interesting outview of the world, humans are all of those things and none of them at the same time. They have all these sub races that we're going to be talking about, but none of them actually give you any special bonuses. Maybe a special name, right, a special kind of name, or maybe an interesting background, but other than that, no. All humans share the same core traits, and those core traits are adaptability and a very broad spectrum in terms of qualities and talents and ideas. The thing I like, I suppose, most about it is that, looking at it from a more timeless perspective, humans, when you look at us separately, when you look at humanity separately, you kind of don't see a lot there. I mean, sure, you can have a painter or a blacksmith or a great warrior, but every other race kind of has a better version of it, a more traditional, more ancient, more, lauded variety of such a thing. Some dwarf is just the best blacksmith in the world, and no human is ever going to be capable of doing that. And yet, when you put this whole thing together, you can add it up to mighty empires and great kingdoms that, most of them, yes, they don't stand the test of time, but while they're there, they're these blazing beacons of civilization that, most of the other races tend to flock to. That, and there's a lot of us, right? There's a lot of humans in the world. Think about that. And yeah, this broad spectrum that we keep talking about means that in terms of appearance, humans can vary, right? They can be short, going even slightly below 5 feet, to very, very tall, going well above 6 feet tall, and they can vary in weight as well, from 125 to 250 pounds. And so human skin, again, kind of like real world, it kind of varies, right? There's a lot of shades, a lot of variety in terms of skin color, eye color, hair, and all these other exterior qualities. But this variety, it kind of goes into everything, right? Humans are the most adaptable and ambitious people among the common races, and they have this wildly varying taste about morality and customs and different approaches to life. But the thing about them is that they always leave this lasting legacy, let's say. And the thing about humanity that mostly characterizes any human character is ambition. Because unlike many of the other races, especially the dwarves and the elves and the halflings and the gnomes, humans don't get to live so long, right? So their lives are twice as bright, if you want to look at it that way. They, as a human, you have to have this ambition, this drive about what you do. So a halfling might go out adventuring because of curiosity. An elf might do it because of ancient lineage, ancient bloodline. Dwarves just might want to go out and grab a brew of a different kind, or find this other interesting thing about the world. But humans always have an underlined ambitions, and that's kind of interesting. I find it very interesting. It's a very personal thing, of course, but in terms of just sheer potential, and for character creation and NPCs and stuff like that, humans are very, very, very good. Now, there are a lot of sub races, and most of them fit into the let's say standardized variety of humans. So you have the Nords, you have desert folk, you have the more Asian twist, You have the old school Anglo-Saxon idea, but as I said, none of these give you any actual statistical or otherwise benefits. They just give you a different idea and maybe a very, very specific name that you might have. Other than that, though, human traits are actually kind of lacking. Hey, that's just who we are. In terms of traits, your ability scores each increase by 1. So that's kind of unique, right? No other race in the game does this, and it allows you to have +1 to everything, which is kind of cool. Or rather, 1 added to every statistic, strength, dexterity, and all those. Age, humans reach adulthood in their late teens and live less than a century. So even the most oldest of human beings doesn't really get to even be an adult in the elven world. Very fun, very cool concept, especially when you have different races in the party. When people start getting into it, it gets really, really interesting. And then alignment. Humans tend toward no particular alignment. The best and the worst are found among them. So yeah, that kind of goes into the whole overview of the race. And no, humanity is not immune or bound by anything. So that means that you can have your chaotic neutral mercenaries, you can have your lawful good paladins, you can have your, just up and evil overlords. And that's very cool. That's very interesting. That means that you have everything out there to play with, and everything that you might have in your head in terms of a concept can be brought to bear by the human race. Size, again, the book kind of talks about this, but your size is medium. So that's important. You're not small, you're not large, you're just, up there, and you have your 30 feet of movement. So that means that you are quite average in terms of these very statistics. And languages, you can speak, read, and write common and 1 extra language of your choice. So that means that you can pick one, and that's again kind of tying into humanity, because a human might be interested in dwarven craftsmanship or elven magic, or the let's say fables of the halflings. So you kind of have pick and go with whatever you feel. But then there's this last little segment that's called variant human traits, and this is where it becomes even more fun. Right off the bat, you're going to notice that it states that the DM must allow this variant human trait, but I always allow it in my games. Why? Because there's no reason not to have it. There's no, let's say, conceptual reason not to have this in your game. And it's the same idea behind the human race, behind the this large variety of qualities that humans might possess, only done in a more refined way, and also adding this new and unique mechanic in terms of choosing a race. So let me get to that. The ability score increase states that you get to increase 2 different ability scores of your choice by 1. So you don't get to have the 5, right? You only get to have the 2, but you can pick which ones, and that's again tying into the whole idea of being very versatile, very adaptive. But then skills, you gain proficiency in 1 skill of your choice. So kind of like the elves and their proficiency in perception, you can pick 1 skill, any single one, athletics or survival or animal handling. Think about your background, think about your idea and what you want to build with this human race, and just run with it. Like, pick whatever is close to you. But this is unique. Now, well, okay, it's not unique, but it's the first time you get to see it in the book at this point. Other races also possess this quality, but with the variant human traits, you can have it. You can have it here. And then the last one, which was the one that I referred to earlier, feat. You gain 1 feat of your choice. So this is the only race in the game that will allow you to pick a feat before you even have a class or a background. And that is to further cement the idea that humans are just so versatile, so adaptive, so driven, that they can gain this deep mastery of things way before they even step on a on the adventurer's path. And I think that's very cool. I really, really enjoy it. My very first character in the game was a human fighter, and as standard as that may seem, actually it turned out to be a lot more deep and refined than any of my other characters. And I've done pretty much everything else. I don't think I've ever played with a Dragonborn before, but hey, leaving stuff for desserts. And speaking of Dragonborn, this is gonna be the next race. Dragonborn are very, very, I don't know what to say, actually, because on one side, I really, really enjoy the race. I really, really like it. I like the idea. On the other, though, it's very different from what you might find in the standard fantasy world, or rather, being able to play as one is actually kind of new. And I've always liked the idea of having a more, let's say, divisive character, because Dragonborn are not your run-of-the-mill race. They are not they're not cookie cutter in any way. So let's get into it. I know that many of you out there are going, what the hell is he talking about? But you know, when you read into their background, and when you read into their history and the extended lore, and when you get into the whole idea behind the race, you're either gonna like it a lot or you're never gonna look at it again. That's just my observation. Again, trying very hard not to be biased in any way. So what is it about Dragonborn that, you know, divides people so much? Well, number one, proud dragonkin, right? That's the first quality that the book is going to put out there for you. And that means that coming from dragons has its benefits, but also its drawbacks. In terms of appearance, Dragonborn are, so far in the book, the largest of the races. Right there with the Goliaths, but that's in the extended lore. So Dragonborn get to be way over 6 feet tall, right? Averaging about 6.5 feet, and they weigh roughly 300 pounds. So they are big, they are large creatures, and that means that in terms of both physical appearance and mindset toward the world, Dragonborn get to be very dominant in the way that they do things. They're very strong, they're very passionate, they have this inner draconic outview that you know, everything that they put their hand onto, everything that they try their hand at, they're going to be very, very good at it. And that's kind of true, actually. A lot of the characters in the world that are going to be in these either very astute villains or great heroes are going to be Dragonborn, just because Dragonborn are very open to, let's say, pledging themselves onto an idea. And another interesting, let's say, characteristic of the Dragonborn is that they are kind of like their ancestors, very self-sufficient. They live in clans, but those clans are mostly based on their appearance, and we're going to get into that later. And they don't really like to tie themselves onto stuff like empire or a kingdom or stuff like that. They're very self-dependent, self-sufficient creatures. And when you make a character that's going to be a Dragonborn, think about that. Think about the cool concepts that you might have with that idea in mind. There's not a lot of fluff in the book itself, right? There's a few paragraphs that are going to tell you most about the Dragonborn, and I think the idea behind that is for you to kind of have your own imagination, to kind of be able to derive certain things that are not written but are right there for you if you want them. And I think the most interesting thing about Dragonborn is that they actually bear the color of their ancestry. So what that means is that depending on the kind of dragon that you know, little Dragonborn hatchlings come from. I mean, just think about that. Come on, the Dragonborn is gonna bear that color. So black, blue, you know, the same chromatic ones that you're quite familiar with at this point, or the metallic ones. That there's a whole dichotomy there between the alignments and the view towards the world, and even in terms of game mechanics. So moving past that, the age of the Dragonborn is also very different than many of the other races. Dragonborn get to develop very quickly. They reach adulthood around the age of 15, and their development is actually so rapid that they can get to a point of a human child of approximately 10 years of age when they are 3 years old. So again, they're very, very quick to adapt to the world around them, to develop into these dominant creatures, but they live to be around 80, meaning slightly less than humans, if you want to look at it that way, because again, you know, less than a century is kind of vague, but there you go. In terms of alignment, Dragonborn tend to go to the extreme, and that's what I referred to previously, because a Dragonborn is either going to be very, very good or very, very not good. That's a characteristic of the race. That means that making conscious choices from one side or the other is a natural thing for them, right? The cosmic war between good and evil, and it's even represented in their heritage, the conflict between Bahamut and Tiamat, respectively. That kind of goes into who they are. I think that's very cool, actually, because unlike the humans, who can be this endless, just depthless cesspool of alignments and ambitions and traits. Dragonborn are much more pure in their desires and their ambitions. They like to devote themselves to whatever their cause might be, and in terms of a character, that actually is very, very cool. We have had a large number of Dragonborn in our party, maybe because the whole idea of 5th edition, or rather around the launch of 5th edition, the whole conundrum was Tiamat, and that led people to kind of get into the Dragonborn, kind of do their own thing. But we've had a paladin, a very lawful good type of character. Of course, later on that changed, and that was very cool, but the core concept of the character in the beginning was this devoted creature, this creature of light, and the tenets that doesn't stray from the path. So yeah, think about your ideas, think about how you can incorporate this into your character, or rather, does this idea fit into your concept? In terms of size, like we spoke about, Dragonborn are big. They are taller and heavier than humans, standing well over 6 feet tall and averaging almost 150 pounds. Their size, however, is still medium. The base walking speed is 30 feet, so those are the important parts. In terms of the book itself, or rather the character sheet. So, moving right along with the Dragonborn, here is where it starts to become very, very different. You are going to look upon the Draconic Ancestry table, and you're going to have to pick what your ancestors were like. So, what was their color, number one, because for dragons, that's very important. It decides a lot about their character, a lot about their views about the world, and then you get two very, very cool benefits from that pick. So number one, there's a damage resistance that you get to have because of your color. Look them over. Obviously, black, you get to resist acid damage, blue, lightning, grass, fire, stuff like that. But also, you get to have a breath weapon, and that is one of the coolest things that a race can ever allow you to have with your character. The breath weapon is an AoE attack. It's either a frontal cone or a 5 by 30 foot line, and it deals a specific type of damage depending on your color. So obviously that's just so cool. As a Dragonborn, you get to do what dragons do usually, so that's breathe fire or any actually type of elemental damage onto your enemies for their ruin. The damage resistance comes into play a lot, especially if you pick stuff like fire or cold, because they're very common in the adventurer's life, also very common in terms of spells. A lot of the spells in the book, actually, I think the most common damage type in terms of spells is fire. So there you go. If that plays into your character, or you have planned it out specifically for that, then there you go. And then languages. You can speak, read, and write Common and Draconic. Now, Draconic is... wow, right? How cool is that? And you can also see the alphabet below, kind of like with the other languages. You can actually use the scripture. A lot of people in the party, especially the aforementioned paladin, have done that, writing entire backgrounds and stories with the language. And again, if this is your thing, it's very, very cool to have. If it is not, then it's there to kind of inspire you, to allow you to branch out into other things. And yeah, moving past that, we're going to be talking about the gnomes.